A poor girl took the wrong subway and ended up in a wealthy neighborhood, where she saved a stranger who was really a millionaire in disguise. "You're lying. You have no home to return to, do you?" The officer's voice was sharp, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Celine stood frozen on the pristine sidewalk, her hands trembling as she clutched the straps of her worn backpack. I just got lost," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I'm trying to find my way back home." "Home?" the officer scoffed, glancing at her disheveled appearance. "No ID, no address, no contacts." "You're lying. You have no home to return to, do you?" Celine's eyes welled up with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She had faced worse than this. At 22, she had learned to mask her pain, to hide her vulnerabilities. Growing up in foster care, she had been shuffled from one home to another, never truly belonging anywhere. Now, working night shifts at a dingy diner in the city's roughest neighborhood, she barely made enough to cover her rent in a rundown apartment. That morning, after a grueling double shift, Celine had boarded the subway, intending to return home. Exhausted, she had dozed off, only to awaken in an unfamiliar, upscale neighborhood. The streets were clean, the buildings towering and immaculate. She had never seen such opulence up close. With no money left on her transit card and her phone battery dead, Celine had started walking, hoping to find a familiar landmark or a subway station. As she wandered, she noticed an elderly man collapse on the sidewalk ahead. Dozens of well-dressed pedestrians walked past, some casting brief glances, but none stopping. Without hesitation, Celine rushed to the man's side. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, gently shaking his shoulder. There was no response. She checked his pulse, weak but present. A small pool of blood was forming beneath his head. "Someone call an ambulance!" she shouted, looking around. People continued to walk by, avoiding eye contact. Frustrated, Celine pulled out her phone, only to remember it was dead. She spotted a nearby cafe and ran inside. "Please, I need to use your phone. A man has collapsed outside," she pleaded. The barista hesitated but handed her the phone. Celine quickly dialed emergency services, providing the location and details. Returning to the man, she used her scarf to apply gentle pressure to the wound on his head. "Help is on the way," she whispered. Minutes later, an ambulance arrived, accompanied by 2 police officers. As the paramedics tended to the man, one officer approached Celine. "Did you see what happened?" he asked. "I found him like this and called for help," she replied. The officer eyed her skeptically. "Do you have identification?" Celine shook her head. "I lost my wallet." "What's your name?" "Celine." "Celine what?" "Just Celine." The officer's expression hardened. "You're lying. You have no home to return to, do you?" Before Celine could respond, a groan came from the stretcher. The elderly man was regaining consciousness. "Sir, can you hear me?" a paramedic asked. The man nodded weakly. "The girl, she helped me." The officer turned to Celine, his demeanor shifting slightly. "Is that true?" Celine nodded. The elderly man looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, dear." As the paramedics prepared to transport him, he reached out and took Celine's hand. "Please, come with me. I want to thank you properly." Celine hesitated, glancing at the officer. "It's okay," the man assured her. "I insist." Reluctantly, Celine climbed into the ambulance, sitting beside the man as they made their way to the hospital. After a thorough examination, the doctors confirmed that the man had suffered a minor concussion but would recover fully. As he rested, he turned to Celine. "My name is Mr. Whitman," he said. "I live nearby. Once I'm discharged, I'd like you to come to my home. It's the least I can do." Celine tried to protest, but he waved her off. "Nonsense! You saved my life." 2 days later, Celine stood before a grand mansion, its gates ornate and imposing. She took a deep breath and rang the bell. A butler opened the door, greeting her warmly. "Miss Celine, we've been expecting you." Inside, the mansion was even more luxurious than she had imagined. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and priceless artwork adorned every room. Mr. Whitman greeted her in the sitting room. "Welcome, my dear. Please, make yourself at home." Celine sat awkwardly, feeling out of place amidst the opulence. "I've arranged for you to stay here for a while," Mr. Whitman said. "You need rest, and I insist." Overwhelmed, Celine nodded. "Thank you." As she settled into the guest room, Celine couldn't help but reflect on the surreal turn her life had taken. From being accused of homelessness to being welcomed into a mansion, it felt like a dream. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, hope, and perhaps a chance at a better life. Celine stood quietly at the edge of the grand hallway, her fingers twisting the frayed strap of her old canvas bag. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, too clean, too refined for someone like her. Her eyes followed the butler as he disappeared behind ornate double doors, leaving her alone in a space too big for silence. From behind, a voice cut through the stillness. "So, you're the girl who just happened to be there when my grandfather collapsed." Celine turned slowly. A tall man in a crisp navy suit stood in the doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. His features were sharp, thick dark brows, clean-shaven jaw, and a gaze that felt like it saw too much. "I'm Celine," she said, her voice careful. "I was on the street when it happened. I helped?" He stepped closer. "Helped? Or saw an opportunity?" "I didn't ask to come here. He insisted," she replied, her voice calm but firm. He narrowed his eyes, then turned and disappeared into another room. Moments later, muffled voices rose beyond the door. The words were indistinct, but the tension was unmistakable. A minute passed before he returned, this time with the elderly man Celine had rescued beside him. "Celine," the old man smiled warmly. "This is my grandson, Daniel." She gave a small nod. Daniel barely returned it. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner where Daniel barely spoke a word to her, Celine found herself sitting in the guest bedroom, feeling like an imposter in a dream too expensive for her to be in. She glanced at the plush comforter, the gold-trimmed curtains, the faint ticking of the antique clock on the dresser. Everything here whispered of a world she did not belong to. The next day, Mr. Whitman, cheerful and chatty despite his bandaged arm, asked Celine to stay a few days to rest and recover from the shock. She started helping out where she could. She noticed Maria, the housekeeper's young daughter, shyly peeking at her book of English words. Celine offered to help, and by the end of the afternoon they were both laughing over mispronounced idioms and silly poems. That evening, Daniel came home from a meeting to find Celine sitting at the long kitchen table, pointing at flashcards while Maria giggled beside her. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "You seem to be making yourself very comfortable," he said coolly. Celine looked up, unbothered. "I'm just helping," she asked. Daniel nodded slowly, but said nothing more. He turned on his heel and walked away, his thoughts clouded with suspicion. He had already begun running a background check on her. He needed to know. No one just stumbled into their world without a reason. The results came back the next day. No parents, no college records, no criminal history. One emergency shelter registered her name from 3 years ago. One part-time job at a diner. That was all. She had nothing to hide because there was nothing there. Daniel sat in his study, the report on his desk, untouched coffee beside him. She was exactly who she said she was, a girl who had nothing and no one. That evening, as he passed by the open doorway of the sitting room, he paused. Celine was folding clean towels with the housekeeper, smiling gently as she worked, her posture relaxed, her words kind. The others responded to her like she had always been there, not like a stranger, like someone who mattered. That night at dinner, Mr. Whitman chuckled at something Celine said and placed a gentle hand on hers. Daniel caught the gesture. His jaw tightened. Later, as they stood on the back patio, the sky awash with twilight, Daniel finally spoke. "You're very good with people." Celine glanced sideways at him. Is that a compliment or a warning? He cracked the faintest smile, still deciding. She gave a small laugh, then looked down at her hands. "I know what you think, that I'm here for something, That I'm after your grandfather's money or kindness or whatever it is rich people assume others want. Daniel didn't deny it. But I didn't ask to stay, she continued softly. And if you want me gone, I'll go. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, he wants you here. That's enough. For now. They stood there in silence, the tension softening just enough to let the night breeze in. Neither fully trusted the other. But something had begun. Not quite understanding. Not yet forgiveness. But perhaps the first crack in the wall between two very different worlds. The days in the Whitman estate passed slowly, and Celine began to feel like she was drifting through a life that wasn't really hers. She helped wherever she could, teaching Maria English, assisting with small tasks around the house, and spending time with Mr. Whitman. He was kind, and his quiet wisdom made her feel like she had found a safe space, even if it was temporary. But there was still something unsettling about Daniel's cold, assessing gaze whenever he was around. One evening, as Celine sat with Mr. Whitman, listening to him talk about his youth, she found herself opening up more than she had intended. The conversation turned to her past, and before she realized it, her voice trembled with memories that had long been buried. I never really had a place, she began softly, her eyes distant as she stared out into the garden. I was orphaned when I was a baby, grew up in a shelter for orphans. Kids there didn't care much about each other. I was always the last one picked for anything, even the games. I wasn't good enough for anyone, I guess. Mr. Whitman's face softened, and he reached over, patting her hand gently. That's a tough start, my dear. But you're not that girl anymore. She forced a small smile, but the sadness still lingered in her eyes. I used to think I was just nobody. Like I didn't matter. I was always looking for someone to prove that I was worth something. But I've learned not to expect that from anyone. People only help when they want something in return. Her voice faltered as she continued. I've been lied to so many times. People tell you they care, but it's never true. Not really. You learn to shut down, to stop trusting. It's easier that way. Mr. Whitman looked at her with a quiet intensity, his voice kind yet firm. You're not worthless, Celine. You're stronger than you think. The way you've handled everything in your life. Most would have given up by now, but not you. You have a special kind of strength. She felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't say anything more. She was grateful for his words, but part of her wondered if they were just pity. She had always been good at seeing the difference between kindness and charity. That night, Daniel returned late from a business trip. Celine was in the kitchen, helping Maria with her homework when she heard the sound of the front door opening. A few moments later, Daniel stumbled into the hallway, his face pale and his eyes glassy. His steps were unsteady, and he looked disoriented. Daniel? Celine said, her voice concerned. Are you okay? He didn't respond immediately, then collapsed against the wall, his hand clutching his head as if he couldn't bear the weight of it. Celine rushed over to him, her heart racing. She had never seen him like this. He looked so vulnerable, so unlike the confident, cold man he usually was. Daniel, she said urgently, what's wrong? You're burning up. He muttered something under his breath, but she couldn't make out the words. Celine immediately went to the kitchen, grabbing a damp towel and returning to his side. She gently placed it on his forehead, but his temperature was shockingly high. She felt panic rising in her chest. You need rest, she said softly, almost more to herself than to him. She helped him into a chair and covered him with the blanket she'd grabbed from the couch. She moved quickly, getting water, medicine, and a bowl of soup from the kitchen. Despite his initial resistance, Daniel leaned back and let her take care of him. Celine felt the warmth of his skin through the towel and couldn't help but notice how much more human he seemed now, stripped of the arrogance and aloofness that he normally carried. She sat by his side, keeping a watchful eye on him as he drifted in and out of sleep. As the night wore on, Daniel's fever began to break, and Celine stayed with him, adjusting the blankets and wiping the sweat from his brow. At some point during the night, exhaustion took over her, and she found herself leaning against the edge of his bed. Her head slowly lowered, and before she could stop herself, she had fallen asleep, her cheek resting on the side of the mattress. Daniel's fever had finally broken by the early hours of the morning, and he slowly regained consciousness. He blinked, the light from the window piercing his tired eyes. He tried to sit up but froze when he saw her there, asleep beside him. Her hair was messy, and her hand was still resting near his pillow, but it was the sight of her that took him by surprise. Her kindness, her genuine care for him, despite everything, made something inside him shift. He watched her for a moment, her steady breathing calming him in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't like the people in his world, the ones who always wanted something from him. She was selfless. He hadn't realized how much that meant to him until now. As Celine stirred slightly, Daniel quickly sat up, not wanting to wake her, but his gaze remained on her. For the first time in a long while, his heart wasn't filled with bitterness or suspicion. There was something about her that felt real, something he hadn't seen in years. Later that morning, after Celine had woken up and checked on him, Daniel didn't say much. He was still trying to process the emotions running through him. But as he left for work, he did something unexpected. He quietly made arrangements for Celine to work at the local library, a place he knew had an opening. He didn't say it was for her benefit, but deep down he knew it was the right thing to do. When he told her the news later, Celine was stunned. Why? Why are you doing this? Daniel's answer was simple. Because you deserve a chance, Celine. And for the first time in a long time, Celine felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she once thought. The morning light filtered through the wide kitchen windows, illuminating the marble countertops and glistening silver fixtures. But despite the serene elegance, tension simmered beneath the surface. Celine entered the kitchen just in time to hear raised voices. I came in early because I have extra prep work, Clara snapped, folding her arms. You always act like you're the only one who cares, Sophia shot back, slamming a spoon into the sink. Stop trying to make me look bad in front of Mr. Daniel. I never said that. Stop, Celine said, her voice soft but firm as she stepped between them. Both women looked at her, startled. Can we take a deep breath first? They didn't speak, but the heat in the air began to dissipate slightly. I know things get stressful, Celine continued, but you two work harder than anyone I know. Maybe it's not about who did what wrong, but how we can stop hurting each other. There was a long pause. Clara looked away first. Sophia's shoulders sank. Later that day, Clara approached Celine in the garden, wiping her hands on her apron. You handled that better than I ever could. You've got something rare, Celine. Celine smiled shyly. I just know what it's like to feel invisible. That evening, Daniel came downstairs in a charcoal gray suit. Grandfather insists you accompany us to the gala tonight, he said, not meeting her eyes. It's a charity event. You're his special guest. I don't belong at places like that, Celine murmured. Daniel looked at her, and for a moment his expression softened. He's stubborn when he wants something. And he's rarely wrong. 2 hours later, Celine stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, dressed in a simple borrowed gown. The chandeliers overhead shimmered like galaxies, and laughter echoed off marble floors. She kept her head down, feeling the weight of the stairs. Whispers followed her as she walked past. Is that the girl they found on the street? She doesn't look like she belongs here. Maybe she's some kind of charity case. Celine's hands trembled, her breath caught. Daniel was speaking with an investor nearby, but he noticed. The moment he heard someone snicker, she probably doesn't even know which fork to use, he turned. He walked straight to Celine and took her hand. Listen closely, he said, his voice clear, projecting. No one has the right to decide someone's worth based on how they look, where they come from, or how much money they have. The room went quiet. She's not here because of pity, Daniel added. She's here because she deserves to be. Celine stared at him, stunned, unsure if her heart was racing from fear or something else entirely. But after the words sank in and the crowd dispersed, a sudden wave of emotion crashed over her. She excused herself, slipping out to the terrace into the rain that had begun to fall. She didn't realize she was crying until the cold droplets mixed with her tears. Footsteps. Then a hand touched her shoulder. No more. Daniel's voice was soft behind her. Why did you do that? She whispered. Now they'll hate you too. I don't care, he said simply. You don't understand. I've spent my whole life being reminded I don't matter, that I don't belong. Daniel stepped in front of her, his eyes burning with something fierce and unfamiliar. You matter. You always have. And then, without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms. The rain fell harder, soaking through their clothes, but neither of them moved. She clung to him like a lifeline, and he held her like he had waited years to find her. He lowered his head, and their lips met in a kiss, gentle, searching, real. It wasn't a fairy tale moment. There were no fireworks, no gasps from bystanders, just two broken people finding something whole in each other beneath the rain. I never knew I was worth this much, she whispered against his chest. Daniel rested his chin on her head. You're worth even more. Inside the ballroom, the party continued, but on the terrace, a different story had just begun. The boardroom was filled with cold stares and calculated silence. Daniel sat at the head of the long mahogany table, fingers steepled beneath his chin, as the chairman, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, spoke slowly and clearly. We've received feedback from major investors, the chairman said, and they are concerned. Your public association with that girl, Celine, has started to affect perception. She's not just some girl, Daniel replied, his voice even. She's not from our world, another board member cut in. We've worked too hard to maintain this company's reputation. If you continue to involve yourself with her, Daniel, the board has the right to vote on your removal as acting CEO. Daniel's jaw tightened. His world had always been cold, built on logic, legacy, and performance. He had never cared about their whispers, but now the cost was real. That night, he sat alone in his office, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. He stared at his phone, her contact glowing on the screen. He didn't call. The next morning, he found Celine in the library room of the estate, reading to the gardener's young son, both of them laughing quietly. She looked up when she saw him, smiled, and he felt the weight in his chest double. But he said nothing about the board, the pressure, the threats. Instead, he began to withdraw. He stopped joining her for meals. He answered her questions with short nods. He kept their conversations shallow, routine. She noticed. Of course she did. Celine didn't ask. She didn't plead or cry. She just began to shrink into herself again. One evening she brought him tea and found him in his study, lights dim, papers scattered across his desk. I know I did something wrong, she said gently, but I don't know what it is. And if you just tell me... Daniel didn't meet her eyes. You didn't do anything wrong, Celine. Then why does it feel like I'm a stranger again? He stood abruptly, walked to the window. Because that's what we are. Her breath hitched. What? I think it's time you left the estate. There it was, sharper than a knife, colder than the rain they once kissed under. Celine stared at him. Is that what you want? Daniel closed his eyes. He wanted to scream, no, but all he said was yes. She didn't cry in front of him. She turned, walked quietly upstairs, and began to pack. She folded each of her few belongings with trembling hands. The sweater he gave her, the book she never finished, the scarf she wore the day they met. When she was done, she left a simple note on the bedside table. I never wanted anything from you. Not your name, not your fortune. Just the peace I found when I was near you. Thank you for giving me that, even for a little while. Be happy, Daniel. Please. By the time Daniel returned to his room, she was gone. He found the note, sat on the edge of the bed, and read it in silence. And for the first time in years, Daniel Rowe, the man who never cried, never faltered, bent over and let the silence break him. In the quiet of that vast, luxurious room, where so much had been built and protected, a man finally realized what he had just lost. Not a reputation, not a position, but the only thing that had ever made him feel truly alive. The bell above the library door chimed softly as Celine stepped inside, a familiar scent of old books and ink washing over her. It felt like stepping into a quiet, forgotten corner of her soul, a place untouched by heartbreak, pressure, or expectations. She had returned not to hide, but to begin again. She organized the children's section, arranged picture books, and reopened the free reading circle for kids from the nearby shelter. Word spread quickly, Miss Celine is back, and every afternoon the small room filled with little shoes, eager eyes, and stories that lifted hearts. She also volunteered to teach basic English and math to immigrant children on weekends. She had nothing to offer but time, patience, and the certainty that kindness could change lives. One afternoon, after a lesson, the head librarian called her aside. "There's a call for you," she said. "It's from the university. They said you applied for the Women's Community Scholarship." Celine's breath caught. "I didn't expect to. You got it." Her knees gave out and she sat down hard on the nearest chair, tears rushing to her eyes. She had never seen herself as a scholar, but now the future was no longer something to fear. It was something to build. That night she wrote in her journal, "No one gets to decide my worth but me. Not where I come from, not how much I have, not who left me." Weeks passed. Celine began attending night classes, her days filled with work and study. Her name quietly became known among non-profits and educators. Her story began circulating, a young woman once mistaken for homeless, now teaching children and earning a degree against all odds. Then one morning, a well-known lifestyle magazine published a feature piece, "The Girl Who Took the Wrong Train and Ended Up Finding Herself." Daniel saw the headline by chance in a cafe near his office. He stared at the picture, Celine sitting on a library floor, a child asleep in her lap, her smile soft and radiant. His fingers trembled. He bought every copy they had. Back at the estate, he locked himself in his study, unfolding the pages with the desperation of someone trying to hold on to a dream. He read every word. About her childhood in shelters, her journey through pain, her new purpose, and then he cried. For the first time since she left, the dam broke. It was not guilt that moved him, but awe. She had not just survived without him, she had become more than he ever imagined. She had bloomed. Later that evening, his grandfather entered his study. "I read it too," the old man said, holding something in his hand. Daniel looked up, eyes still red. "She left this behind," his grandfather added, placing a pale blue scarf, Celine's scarf, on the desk. "She used to wrap it around her hands when she was nervous." Daniel reached out, touching it like it was something sacred. "Do you know what I saw in her?" the old man asked softly. "Not pity, not charity. I saw fire, and warmth, and someone who made this cold house feel alive again." Daniel said nothing, only closed his fingers around the scarf. "You're letting fear rob you of the best thing that ever happened to you," his grandfather whispered. "And if you keep doing that, she won't be the only one who lost something." The room fell silent again, but in Daniel's chest a decision had already begun to form. Not out of regret, out of love, out of the deep, irrevocable knowledge that what he let go was never beneath him. It was everything he never knew he needed. And now, he would do whatever it took to find her again. The university auditorium buzzed with laughter, camera shutters, and the rustle of gowns. Proud families packed the rows, clutching flowers and balloons, craning their necks to spot loved ones among the sea of graduates. Celine stood among them, wearing her cap and gown, her heart thudding with disbelief and pride. The announcer called her name, Celine Grace Whitman. She stepped forward, head high, smile trembling. Her eyes scanned the crowd automatically and stopped. In the very last row, standing still, was Daniel. He wore no suit, just a simple shirt and dark jeans. But his eyes, they held everything. She nearly stumbled. Their eyes locked. He said nothing, made no gesture, but he stood there solid and quiet, like an unspoken promise. After the ceremony, he was gone. A week passed. Celine resumed her work at the library. Every afternoon she read stories to children, planned her next community class, edited the manuscript for her book, yet Daniel's silent presence lingered like a question she could not answer. Then one rainy Thursday he came. The door creaked softly. She looked up from the children's desk, and there he was, soaked from the drizzle, holding her scarf. Her breath caught. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced," he said quietly. "I didn't know if I'd even get the chance to speak to you." The room was empty save for them. The storm outside muffled the world. Celine stood slowly. Her heart raced, but her voice was calm. "You found me." Daniel nodded. "I read your story. I read everything. I watched from the back during your graduation. I didn't want to ruin your day." Celine swallowed hard. "Why are you here?" "I'm not here to justify what I did," he said. "You deserved honesty, and I gave you fear. I let the world decide for me who I could love, and in doing so, I lost you." He stepped closer but didn't reach for her. "I wanted to be brave for you, but I was a coward. I let people who never knew your heart judge you, and I didn't fight hard enough. But I never stopped loving you." Celine's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then why didn't you say something?" "Because I thought I had no right," he admitted. "But I'm here now, not to ask for your love. Just for a chance to be near you again. However you'll let me." Then he did something she never expected. Daniel dropped to his knees, not in proposal, but in surrender. "I'm not asking for forever," he said, voice cracking. "I'm just asking for a beginning, a chance to earn back your trust, to be a part of your life in whatever way you'll allow, as a friend, a supporter, or someone who just waits quietly nearby." Celine's hands trembled. "I don't care what the world thinks anymore," he continued. "I don't care if I run another company or plant trees for the rest of my life. As long as you remember, I was the one you forgave. That's enough." Tears streamed down her cheeks. She knelt in front of him, and without a word she wrapped her arms around him. Daniel buried his face into her shoulder, holding on to her like a man who had wandered deserts and finally found water. "I'm still angry," she whispered. "I know," he murmured. "I'm still hurt." "I deserve that. But I never stopped missing you," she said, "even when I hated that I did." They sat on the library floor, wrapped in each other. The rain tapped softly on the windows. The books stood silently on their shelves, and the clock seemed to slow down, giving them space to breathe, to forgive, to begin again. And somewhere inside them, something broken mended, not perfectly, but truthfully. Because love, when returned, is not always grand. Sometimes it kneels, and waits, and hopes to be forgiven. The sun filtered softly through the canopy of leaves that shaded the backyard of the Restart Library. Twinkling fairy lights hung between trees, and tables were set with wildflowers picked by neighborhood children. There were no luxury chairs, no grand aisle, just benches, laughter, and the scent of homemade pies cooling on nearby windowsills. A year had passed since Celine and Daniel found their way back to each other. Since then, Daniel had made a choice that stunned the business world. He stepped away from boardrooms and headlines, and quietly became co-director of the community library they built together. No more tailored suits or power lunches. His new days were filled with mending shelves, organizing book drives, and teaching jobless veterans how to code. Celine, radiant with newfound confidence, had become a beacon in the neighborhood. Her book, The Day I Took the Wrong Train But Found the Right Life, had quietly climbed bestseller lists. But more importantly, it had changed lives. Letters poured in daily, women who left shelters, teens who dared to apply for college, lonely people who believed in hope again because of her words. And now, today, was their wedding. The guests were people often forgotten, street musicians, librarians, old ladies from the corner store, kids who once stole to eat but now read at night. There was no press, no fashion magazines, just real people with real stories, all bound by the quiet magic Celine and Daniel had brought into their lives. Celine wore a simple white dress that fluttered in the breeze. Her hair was adorned with tiny daisies, picked that morning by a little girl named Lily. Daniel stood waiting under a wooden arch they'd built together out of discarded planks and painted with local kids. He looked no different than any man in love, except his smile held the weight of every detour they had survived. The ceremony was short, honest. When they exchanged vows, neither tried to be poetic. They just promise to stay, to not run when it gets hard, to fight fair and forgive often, to love with eyes open. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," cheers erupted louder than any orchestra. Afterward, as cake was served and children danced barefoot in the grass, a quiet voice tugged at Celine's dress. It was Ava, a small girl Celine had taught to read the year before. She had been abandoned at a train station and taken in by a foster home nearby. Ava clutched a hand-drawn card and looked up, her big eyes brimming. "Miss Celine," she said, voice trembling, "you're not a princess." Everyone nearby paused, unsure what the child meant. "No, I'm not. But you're my miracle. Because now, I don't have nightmares anymore. Because now, I know there's kindness in the world." Daniel watched, swallowing the lump in his throat. Celine hugged the little girl tightly. "You are the miracle, Ava. You." And there it was, the sixth crescendo, not in drama or flash, but in truth, in the quiet revelation that love, when lived, becomes a shelter, that healing, when shared, multiplies. Later that night, as the stars came out and the music softened, Daniel and Celine sat on the library steps, watching their chosen family laugh and dance under the fairy lights. "We'll never be perfect," Celine said, her head resting on his shoulder. Daniel kissed the top of her head. "But we're real." "And that's enough," she whispered. Behind them, the library sign glowed softly, the Restart Library, a place to begin again, and beneath that light, two people, once lost, sat side by side. Not as saviors, not as survivors, but as partners in a life rebuilt from broken pieces, glued together by choice, by kindness, by love. And the world, for that moment, felt just right. Thank you for staying with us through this journey of pain, courage, and healing. Celine's story began with a wrong train and a heart heavy with struggle, but in the most unexpected place, she found not only kindness, but a new path, a new family, and a love that never judged her past. Her story reminds us that even when we feel lost, we might just be one step away from everything we've ever needed. If this story touched your soul, if it reminded you that every broken piece can still become part of something beautiful, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And don't forget, subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories and click the bell icon so you never miss a story that could heal your heart, inspire your journey, or remind you that love still lives in the quietest places. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.